everybody. How's it going? Hope y'all had an interesting week. I sure did. Um, it's gray and wet and cloudy here in Kingston, New York. But one of the things I love about this weather is the smell of wet soil and earth and even concrete, like the minerals in the concrete and the dirt, wet rocks. It smells like life, like fecundity, which is such a Taurus thing. And this is the season that we're in. And it reminds me especially of my childhood. I grew up part time in Hawaii, and it always smells like life there. It's always moist. So in the air, you can smell plants, flowers, fruit, the ocean, and it's so fragrant, like all the time, and so pungent. The environment, if you can imagine, it's just constantly teeming with life, and the birth death cycles move so fast. And I guess the most obvious representation of this would be in the volcanoes in Hawaii, where you can, in real time, watch new earth forming itself out of lava. It's simply awesome. Like literally, you're in awe of watching life create itself. And all of this reminds me of the Taurus Scorpio axis, where we're experiencing the end of the Taurus Scorpio eclipses. And it is eclipse season. And we had a very intense solar eclipse in Aries a few days ago. And I want to talk about eclipses a little bit in general today because I'm having a lot of conversations with people, and I'm having in my consultations, people are really being presented with a lot of change and having various reactions to that. A lot of people being presented with forks in the road and trying to navigate fear around change, or what's too much change or not enough change. And as we have another eclipse coming up in a couple of weeks, yeah, I just wanted to give some framing around it and also pull in Taurus season. The last eclipse we had was in Aries, which, starts a new cycle of eclipses. But we're in Taurus season now. So I wanted to move away from all of that Aries stuff we were talking about during the last eclipse and pull it towards Taurus. Um, so that last eclipse was in Aries, which means that it was a new moon. And during a solar eclipse, the sun gets blocked, the lights go out. In astrology, the sun represents our consciousness and even our will. And sometimes we need the lights to go out so we can pay attention to what's lurking in the shadows. Eclipse season is when the subconscious gets to speak. It's when what is suppressed gets to emerge. And the sun also symbolizes things like our inspired ideals, our sense of purpose, centrality, and authority figures. And so during a solar eclipse, those kinds of things get eclipsed as well. Whatever in our day to day experience is getting light shined on it, that's what we tend to look at. But it is seldom the whole picture. What we're conscious of is but a fraction of all that is in play in any given situation. So, eclipse season can be super informative if you're willing to see differently and open yourself up to other forms of knowing. And we also need to be patient during eclipse season. I'm sure many people will have some profound revelations and surprising events come up, but it will be much more subtle for others. Eclipses unfold, and sometimes we get all kinds of messages without really paying any attention to them. During this time, it's possible you could just be having recurring thoughts or dreams and not pay them any mind and just be kind of like, huh, oh, that's weird, and then go on your merry way. And a lot of the time, they might not mean that much. But this is eclipse season. I would give those types of things much more significance. Eclipses change whole trajectories. For some, this change, of course, will arrive as a spectacular event. But for most people, I'd recommend just paying attention. What's knocking on your door? What things are rolling in and what's going on around you? Pay attention to little changes, little pieces of information, random encounters. Um, who keeps bugging you? I mean, what keeps bugging you? While they might not seem like anything significant right now, they could be the very beginning of a major change that will, again, unfold over time. And this is a particularly good week to pay attention to subtleties because the skies are relatively quiet this week. And it's not that nothing's happening, it's just that there are no major transits that perfect this week. No new sign ingresses or planets changing direction. So we're largely living in the unfolding of transits past their peak. It's like when the transits reach their peak and they perfect in their alignment, it's like striking a gong, but the sound ripples out for a while. So when I report on the transits here, I'm reporting on that striking of the gong and maybe just a little bit about the wind up or the approach and maybe a little bit about the unfolding, but mostly that's for you to tune into on your own. And that's how you practice working with the astrology, but not totally on your own, because we're here. And I just want to remind you that you can share your thoughts with us about whatever you're experiencing or ask questions. Give us show recommendations or guest recommendations. I recently bumped into Micah on the street. Micah works here at Radio Kingston and the Good Works Institute. He works all over Kingston, basically. And I bumped into him. I hadn't seen him in a while. And he was like, "Hey, weren't we supposed to do another show?" And I was like, "Right, I'm going to get in touch with you." And then right away, I started thinking, what kind of show could we do with Micah? And then I was like, well, why does it have to be some idea that, I present to him that, that, you know, we have to talk about something that I want to talk about? You also can say, hey, I want to have a conversation and I want to look at this thing, whatever it may be, through an astrological lens. You can do that. And so I think when I talk to Micah later, I'm going to present that. And you can do all of this by emailing us at thecosmicdispatch@gmail.com. And you can stay up to date with all of our Cosmic Dispatch content on our Instagram. And yeah, if you have questions, just email us. Mandee will be there on the other end to collect your info, questions. You can also sign up for a monthly newsletter, which includes horoscopes, moon reports, bonus content, and information about workshops and consultation schedules. Um, my books open back up in May, but they're already filling up. If you want to see me in May, I would jump on that. I have maybe 2 spots open, and June is crazy. So just I'll be putting that out on Instagram a little more clearly later, like when I'm seeing people. Um And so we're also up on YouTube. So that's new. We're starting to do that. Check that out if that's your platform of choice. So there is one big aspect this week, but it involves the nodal axis of the moon, which just spells more eclipse energy. The sun in Taurus conjuncts the north node in Taurus on the 24th. That's tomorrow. And that's just a few days after the sun's square to Pluto. Very intense. Um, and now that we are in the thick of eclipse season, this really points to attitudes about change and control. Again, very Taurus things. During this season of change, which is eclipse season, we need to examine our attachment to having things the way we want them, which usually translates to whether we think something is good or bad. In astrology, there is no objective good or bad, just what we prefer or the ego's desire to have its way. And when we set goals or go after things, we will usually judge ourselves as winners or failures based on whether we were able to make what we want happen. If we win, we may assign ourselves the virtues of determination and hard work. And, if we fail, you know, vice versa. And when we accomplish things and when we prove to ourselves that we can do whatever it is, that feels good. That feels good to the ego, and it bolsters the illusion that we have ultimate control over our lives. And we forget about things like privilege and generational wealth and individual health and timing, circumstance, luck. We also forget that in doggedly pursuing our heart's desire, that we may have closed ourselves off to hundreds of options that might have been better, but because they're different, we don't recognize those things as, well, that's something that I would do. That sounds like me. That's something I would prefer. But in order to use this realization, we have to expand. We have to admit that maybe we're not in control of everything and that we're dependent on a whole confluence of a million other things. And it's hard to admit that to ourselves because then we don't get to revel in this process of proving over and over to ourselves that we know what's best for ourselves and that we can bend the world to our will. Now, in light of all of that, how how impressive now does it sound to avoid growth and change so that you can, rigidly stay in place or stay on track and prop up this illusion that you're the master of the universe and that you know what's best for you. How free are we if we are slaves to false comforts, slaves to static ideas about who we are? One of my favorite astrologers, Rob Brezhnev, says this quote: "Any project that doesn't have at least some growing pains may lack ambition. If we hope to transcend our previous limits and become a more complete expression of our destiny, we must stretch ourselves in ways." And now here's my favorite part: "We must stretch ourselves in ways that inconvenience our old selves." It's very eclipsy stuff here. And now, if you happen to find that you just keep winning and you just keep hitting all the marks, hitting all your targets, well, I mean, good for you. But instead of congratulating yourself too hard, think about the reasons that that's even so important to you or even desirable. At some point, and this goes for all of us, life will force growth and diversity if you don't open to it. And when it does, try not to despair about being thrown off track. Here's the big secret. There is no track. And furthermore, when we invest too much in these narrow ideas of, we must have this or we must have that, right? Sounds a lot like determination and all those good things. But when we do that, we trade the genuine awe of the power of nature and things that are bigger than us. Kind of like when I was describing the volcanoes, like, wow, I don't know how this works. And I'm seeing it and I don't understand it. And I'm so tiny and in awe of this big process. Why would we trade that for this tiny little thing called the illusion of certainty, or just what I happen to know and just live there? Seems so small, right? In comparison. True freedom and comfort, which is, you know, what Taurus wants. But like true comfort comes from trust that you can open to all kinds of possibilities. So, one of the Taurus tendencies is to clearly label. I want this and I don't want that. I like this and I don't like that. And I'm going to stick with what I want and what I like based on comfort, my personal values. And Taurus is also a genius at growing things. Now, things don't grow if they're forced into conditions of stagnation. So, the North Node is in Taurus for a few more months. Uranus is in Taurus for a few more years. And we have Mercury in Taurus for several weeks and retrograding. These factors are asking Taurus for more biodiversity. They want to up the growth factor and the sustainability by asking Taurus to let go, trust, and recognize that there are more resources than it could possibly imagine. And also, um, we want to free Taurus from letting go of its need to constantly prove its own efficacy to itself, mostly. Like, I can do that. See, I can control this. Look, I did it. I made that happen. Um, a lot of that, yeah, that's part of Taurus. But again, doubling down, tripling down on that one action or activity is not going to work out long term. And therefore, it's going to kind of cancel out the sustainability that Taurus actually desires. It's limiting self sustenance. And self sustenance also doesn't really exist. This Taurus season is asking us to expand our definition of things like beauty, wealth, safety, pleasure by putting us through some growing pains. It's going to be uncomfortable, but that's how you know it's new and different. You're growing. I'll throw fear in there too. The, fear is tricky. Sometimes we want to listen to it because it stops us from getting into dangerous situations. Um, but sometimes it holds us back from the growth we need. And this thing that we think is so scary is it's not that it's scary. It's just we don't know it yet. But that's what makes it new. Um, so yeah, that's what I have to say. I mean, I could go on about this. This is one of like my favorite topics. It's just change. So that's what I have to say about that. And Sun conjoining North Node and eclipse season. But we're going to take a short break. And when we come back, I'll be joined by astrologer Mandee Sheeler with a little Mercury retrograde report because, yeah, that's going on too. And we have some audience questions. So see you in a couple minutes.
Underwriting at Radio Kingston fuels our community fund, which helps support Kingston community members in immediate need of financial assistance and supports other community initiatives. For more information about supporting the community fund, email underwriting@radiokingston.org.
Hey, my name is June, and I'm an organizer with For the Many, a grassroots community organization that has been fighting for affordable housing in the Hudson Valley for over 10 years. Here in Kingston, rents have skyrocketed, evictions have soared, and there are over twice as many Airbnbs for tourists as there are available apartments for locals. That is why we are fighting back. Early last year, we won good cause eviction in Kingston, a law that protected tenants from no-cause evictions and large rent increases. However, a judge ruled that only the state could pass this law, so now we need State Senator Hinchy to stand with tenants and fight to pass it in Albany. In the fall, we won a 15% rent reduction for 1,200 units, the first rent reduction in the country. And right now, For the Many is fighting to regulate Airbnbs so that locals can keep their homes from turning into vacation rentals. The only way we win is with people power. To get involved, go to forthemany.org.
Hi, I'm Blake File. Join me Tuesday nights at 10 p.m. for The File. Socially, politically, economically, environmentally, and spiritually, our progress depends on intergenerational dialogues.
Because so much about modern life, it's pinballing our physiology all over the place.
I could almost feed that text in and have the relationship I want with my mother.
I just tried to fill out this magical world purely for my own delight.
And really great music. That's The File, Tuesday nights at 10 here on Radio Kingston, AM 1490, FM 1079, and anytime at radiokingston.org.
You're listening to The Cosmic Dispatch. I'm your host, Cory Nakasue, and with me today is Mandee Sheeler, also known as the Keeper of the Questions. How you doing, Mandee?
I'm doing well, Cory. How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
Really good. How'd last week's astrology hit you? If it hit you.
It didn't really. I had there. It happened to a lot of people around me, so I dealt with it in that way. But I was just looking at my chart and that eclipse, and really, this is like a pocket where I don't have a whole lot going on in my chart. This later degree of the cardinal signs, I've got some out of sign aspects happening, but nothing. The Taurus Scorpio eclipses are what get me. So
So yeah, watch out.
yeah.
In a couple weeks.
Exactly.
And do you have, oh, I know you do. I don't know why I'm pretending like I don't know what's going on. You wrote you wrote a little something about Mercury retrograde for the St. Louisan.
Yeah.
And it's about Mercury's retrograde through Taurus. And I was wondering if you'd be so kind to share whatever you feel is most interesting in that report.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Mercury has a really prominent place in my chart, and I'm I'm learning that I'm like highly passionate about Mercury retrograde times because it can really get a bad rep like in the world. So I would really like to work to change that a little bit and kind of offer some different ways to think about it. And that's like where it's really essentially just a list of kind of my musings for the season. That's kind of the motivation behind it. So I think the first thing for me that I wanted to kind of bring attention to was this narrative that we have around Mercury retrograde in our own minds. A lot of times we hear Mercury retrograde and there's this thought that comes to mind. A lot of times it's not always, I don't know, it frustrates me, the things that come up about Mercury retrograde. It's Yeah, there's like the typical Mercury tech stuff that can happen. The miscommunication, putting the wrong date or time down on the schedule and showing up a day late or an hour late or whatever. But there's also this invitation to be a little bit more intentional with our time when those things happen. And I think that kind of taps into the playful nature of Mercury. And that, yeah, I think one of the things I wrote about in this too, Cory, is this idea of earth seeds. And I've been reading Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. And so you just mentioned all of this change, this energy towards change. And the kind of the big message of that book is God is change. And so I think that's something to maybe consider during, during this time. But also, I don't know, there's my brain's going in a whole bunch of different directions, Cory, but I think for me, this idea of being an earthling is coming up during this retrograde. Not only is Mercury retrograde in Taurus like the earth sign of the zodiac, right? But there's a really big need for focusing on earth related themes and topics. And so that's kind of where my head's at with all of this.
Hmm.
I, yeah. What are you thinking?
Well, you brought up, God is change.
Yeah.
Um, and there's something really significant. I hope I don't go down a rabbit hole, but I feel like I just have to bring this up.
Yeah.
And in our work together, um, have we haven't talked about primary and secondary motion, have we?
Mm-mm. No.
Okay, so this is what's making, I think, this eclipse even. I mean, there's a lot of reasons this eclipse season is really significant, but
Yeah.
one of them is Mercury's retrograde.
Yeah.
I'll try to do this as simply as possible. Retrograde motion, when, all of us here on Earth are talking about, oh, the planets look like they're going backwards, they look like they're reversing. That's, they're retrograde. That retrograde motion is actually called primary motion,
Okay.
which, since you brought up God is change, a lot of astrologers call that motion God motion or God time.
Mm.
That's like it's representative of the motion of some larger intelligence. We don't even have to use the word God, but that
Yeah.
word is there because it's easy.
Yeah.
So that's the higher, um, quote unquote, higher motion intelligence of time. As us earthlings are looking up at the sky and we're seeing the planets go quote unquote forward or direct, those planets are individuating themselves from God time.
Mm.
So even, and as some of us know, the nodes also move in retrograde, primary motion, God time. So when any of the planets do their retrograde, they're on God time.
Mm.
And it's kind of the way of getting things back on track. I know I just said there's no such thing as a track, but but getting things back in alignment with the larger intelligence, or getting things back on track with God.
Yeah.
That is actually the higher motion. So when we have our retrogrades, some things fall into place, even though, because we're so focused on our individuation from things like fate or destiny or the larger intelligence, we're like, oh no, something's wrong. When actually we're getting put back in sync with the the larger intention of nature. I mean, I could say this in a lot of different ways. It's hard to escape things that are like very, religious or whatever.
Yeah.
So to have Mercury, retrograding in the same sign that like the North Node is doing its retrograde, it's its normal motion. there's something that's really pushing to realign some things, and it's a bigger, nature is so much more powerful than us. It's a
Yeah.
bigger force than our little individuations, right? To do our own thing.
Yeah.
So that's why. So that's, yeah. For those of you who are studying astrology, it's kind of like a intermediate advanced topic. It's primary motion, secondary motion, but there's a little taste. That's a whole other rabbit hole. But yeah, thank you, Mandee. And you can read Mandee's full, and I really enjoyed your full Mercury retrograde report. You can read that at the St. Louisan and maybe on your website.
Yeah, it's on my Instagram page. Yeah, there's a whole list of things. And one of the things on there, Cory, and this touches on what you're talking about, is this quote from Jessica Doerr's book, Tarot for Change. And I believe, I forget which card this was for exactly, but the quote is this idea of spiritual practice as an exercise in vertical respiration. So it's where one forges and continuously maintains a connection between the above and below. And that's, I think, yeah, exactly what you were just kind of talking about.
Yeah, yeah, love it. Yeah,
Same.
that's
Yeah,
really
I
cool.
like Mercury retrograde. It's an opportunity to focus on things and to focus like inward and down on the connection between all the things. Yeah.
Right. And and you know, we're in relationship with the earth and time and everything. It's a relationship. So basically, when a planet goes retrograde, especially Mercury, I'm like, okay, yeah, give me your input. It's time for me to listen. Like,
Yeah.
what do you have to say about our relationship, and how I've been individuating? It's time for me to maybe align myself with some of the things you want to do. And as I was saying earlier, in our culture, we are just so not up for that. It's like
Yeah.
what I want in the way I want, and I'm gonna make it happen. And it's like, okay, yeah, you're missing a lot of help you could get, actually, and support.
Yeah.
Um, so, and also, Mandee, you have a Taurus sun. Since we're in the season, I want to keep, bringing up Taurus
Yeah.
experiences. Um, yeah, what's hitting you is a, I don't know, I use this violent language. Must be my Aries. What is what's your experience during Taurus season as a Taurus sun?
It's funny. I just saw a meme or some a blurb of astrology online somewhere. I forget exactly what it was, but it was like, Taurus, why do you always feel the need to say that you're the best sign of the zodiac? And it just made me laugh because I've never said that, but now I'm thinking it. And Taurus season is beautiful. There's so many colors. There's so many. You were talking about the smells of the earth. There's just so much for every sense, right? I can see beautiful things, I can smell beautiful things, I can smell earthy things, I can touch the ground. It's been freezing, so I feel like I'm happy to go put my toes in the dirt. Um, I don't know. I do love Taurus season. It feels like things are, Aries season, if you want to be I don't know, kind of elemental about it. If Aries season is the season of planting the seed, then I feel like Taurus season is when that seed takes hold and when things really kind of strengthen up a little bit. And so I always feel a little bit more, I don't know, alive during this time.
Absolutely. And transit wise,
Yeah.
you also have Uranus, which is in Taurus, heading for your sun, and I believe it's probably going to hit your sun sometime this summer.
Yeah,
Are you feeling the wind up or the approach at all?
absolutely. And I was thinking about this during the astro weather and you kind of opening up this conversation. And I was kind of transported back to a conversation that you and I have had. And I forget exactly what we were talking about, but it was this idea of, Taurus really does want to kind of stand its ground and dig in sometimes, even when it's not always necessary or the best thing to do. And so I feel like personally, this Uranian thing happening for me, and I've got some other placements that's being hit and activated as well, but it's encouraging me to kind of let go of that and to soften up. And this conversation you and I had, Cory, was about sometimes the best thing you can do is to soften up. Instead of holding it and digging in further, that kind of letting go. And so kind of my motto for this transit and season of life has been do the uncomfortable thing, because again, that's where the growth happens. And then I've also been doing a lot of kind of dissecting as to what, like, where does this discomfort come from? Is it fear? Is it instability? Is it just different and new and not what I'm used to? So that's kind of how I'm experiencing it on the earth plane.
Thank you. I think, that's helpful. I've had some conversations with a couple other people who have Taurus suns at that early 20 degree. And I was like, oh, yeah. They're like, oh, one woman was like, oh, I really want to like start a new career. And like, it keeps like
Yeah.
gnawing at me. But I got to this point. I think she's like the CEO of something. She's in a really like, and it's secure. She has
Yeah.
power.
Yep.
She's comfortable. Um, and even though she really wants to do something else, the thought of letting go of that. And basically, I was just like, oh, yeah, you're going to start that this year. That'll happen.
That's happening. Yeah. And I think that's kind of a Taurian lesson to be learned is like things are going to happen whether you're digging your heels in or not. So
Yeah, we can do this, the hard way or it's all kind of hard, but it could be
absolutely.
a little easier.
Yeah.
So, so Mandy, you have some questions. Let's tackle one of these. I just cut myself again. I'm like hitting things and tackling things. And just like I'm just being very mindful about my language. Let's respond to one of these questions.
Yeah, sure. So the first question is, in a recent episode, y'all urged listeners to send in questions. So here's mine. If I'm starting a creative public-facing project now, I'm so okay, public-facing project now that will take a few months to complete, when is the best time to unveil it this year, astrologically speaking? Sorry, when is the best time to unveil it this year, astrologically speaking? Virgo, Sun, Gemini rising, Pisces moon. This is MB are the initials.
MB, I know MB.
Mhm.
And so this is what we call in astrology an electional astrology question, where you ask an astrologer to elect a date and time, something, auspicious for a certain thing. I don't get asked this a lot, but when I do, it's usually something like weddings. Um, and it's fun, but it's a little bit involved. Electional charts are specific to the people involved, the kind of project, the specific place and time they're happening. And we're looking at everything going on in the sky, but especially the moon and the ascendant of the event, which is why it's so important to know like exactly where and what time, because the moon moves pretty fast. So we don't have all that, but we do know this person's chart is ruled by Mercury, so no Mercury retrograde, and in general, no eclipses. And we do know it's creative and public facing. And for public events, typically, not in all cases, we want a moon that's waxing, gaining light. This is a time when people want to be together. People tend to be more happy to see and be seen. I'm going to assume because of the ascendant that the most public part of this person's chart is going to be in Pisces, the midheaven. Um, a full moon in Pisces during Virgo season sounds nice, but I'm not sure what's going on with that particular full moon and where it's going to be. I have to say at the moment, my favorite full moons coming up are the upcoming Sagittarius full moon in June and the Capricorn full moon in July. And in general, this summer is going to be off the chain for people wanting to go out and get together. And when I say get together, I also like literally mean like sexually, like hooking up. And this person works and writes a lot about sex, so I don't know if the project has something to do with it, but I assume it might. And June through August, libidos will be on fire for better or worse, and people are just gonna want to get together. So I'm thinking sometime in the summer, like that might just in general be a good time. But anyway, if you're looking for an election, it takes a little more work if it's for a very specific event. Good question. We are going to take a short break, and then when we come back, more questions.
What does community radio mean to you?
I think that radio brings our community together, and we communicate, and we get to know each other, and it's a beautiful thing. It's what makes Kingston the way it is.
Radio Kingston.
Many voices, one community.
Hi, I'm Winston Queen with My Kingston Kids. In collaboration with Harambe, kids ages 10 to 18 have a safe place to socialize, connect, engage, and participate in some of Kingston's most exciting activities. Kingston High School is hosting Lights On Fridays from 6 to 9 p.m. Kids will have access to virtual reality gaming, indoor-outdoor sports, arts and crafts, cooking instruction, and production. They'll have access to the weight room, photography, financial education, the gym club, LGBTQ social club, and more. For more information and to register, go to mykingstonkids.com.
Radio Kingston. Many voices.
Many voices.
Many voices.
One community.
Hi, I'm Malcolm Byrne. Join me Sunday nights from 8 till 10 on The Long Way Around. I like having people on the show who get to the heart of uncomfortable truths.
You know, it's so true in 1789 and so true today. The idea that the poor have a right to the law is revolutionary.
And the only people, of course, who see war are the people who are in war because the images are so sanitized. If we ever actually saw war, we wouldn't be able to wage it.
The music of art and the art of conversation.
I think so much of singing is you're responding to what you're hearing.
The Long Way Around, Sunday nights from 8 till 10, here on Radio Kingston, AM 1490, FM 1079, or anytime at radiokingston.org.
You're listening to the Cosmic Dispatch. I'm your host, Cory Nakasue, and with me today is Astrologer Mandee Sheeler, aka the Keeper of the Questions, and we are answering some questions that you've written in with. And let's get back to that, Mandee. What's next?
Next up, if astrology is a timing technique, at what, quote, ages or anniversaries can people expect to have a harder time than others? And when are more auspicious times? And this comes from NP.
Okay. I'm always going to preface that in order to answer a lot of these, we have to know the whole chart. Like just across the board, you gotta look at the whole chart. Okay, so I said that. Now, in general, so we're asking difficult times in general. We're going to be looking at Saturn and its cycles and when it makes hard aspects, which is about every 7 years. Saturn, typically, one of the many things it does, why I'm choosing it, is Saturn will point out what's not working, where things need changing, where you're going to have to wait or stop doing something maybe you think you really want to do. Those are typically hard things to deal with, but that's not the only thing Saturn does. Um, and so when, we encounter this difficulty, no one likes to hear like, oh, you did that wrong, or oh, you got to go back and do that over. That's difficult. But because astrology is a relationship, let's say Saturn checks you and you actually did everything right and you're in really good shape. You're going to get a little like graduation to the next level, or more responsibility if that's something you want, or more commitment, or you're going to get an advancement. But Saturn can also, that's when you're going to be told that this isn't working or that you have to stop. And then you get to decide if you want to, pursue some changes so that you can eventually, have the thing that you want or have something stronger. So that's that Saturn relationship, again, in general. And in general, some easier times, we're looking at Jupiter. And Jupiter is, the opposite of Saturn. It's benevolent, it's forgiving, it's merciful, and it's abundance. Um, and those hard aspects happen every 3 years. But just like, again, it's a relationship. Let's say you're getting a Jupiter return or a Jupiter opposition. Depending on what you've done, if you've done a lot of the hard Saturn work, or if you've been like on a steady path of like something like where you're trying to grow something, or even personal growth, when Jupiter hits those hard aspects, you might get a bump. You might get a little prize. You might get some help. And conversely, if you haven't really been, aiming yourself in that direction, Jupiter will come along. You might have a really nice 1 or 2 weeks where you're feeling, really good about life, having some fun, feeling optimistic, and then it's gone. And but because you're not meeting it with anything, like basically like Jupiter hard aspects, the image that comes to mind is like you pull the lever on the slot machine and all the goodies come out. But if you haven't been, at that slot machine, I keep thinking these little old ladies, like they're there forever and they're putting in. If the timing's right and they get stuff, it's rare. It happens, but it's rare that you just show up to the slot machine and it comes out on the first try. So yeah, the 7 year markers for Saturn tend to be their moments of reckoning. And the 3 year markers on Jupiter tend to be opportunities to cash in if you've been investing, if you've been applying yourself. So it's again relationship. But that's my answer for that. I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
I think that's sums things up great. It makes me think of relationships in general, and they say things like the 7 year itch or the 14 year, but that would then be right, like the chart of that relationship is what you'd be looking at for those.
Totally.
Yeah. And the
Yeah.
people involved in said relationship.
Yeah, you're looking at the Saturn markers for the relationship or the project, and then you're looking at the Saturn markers for the individual people.
Yeah.
To get a better picture of that.
Yeah. But given what we were given, I think that was a great answer, Cory. Next question, and these are my questions, Cory. I was curious if you would share a little bit about your experience with Uranus transiting your natal sun.
Oh, I think you're going to have a much easier time because when I had Uranus conjunct my sun, that also coincided with my Uranus opposition because natally I have Uranus opposite my sun. On top of that, I had Pluto squaring my sun. So that was during the like 2012 to 2015 Uranus Pluto square. On top of that, I had my Saturn opposition, which goes right on top of my MCIC. And also, I have Venus, Saturn, and Mars at my MC. So Saturn was opposing all of that. And I had my Sati Sati. Saturn was in the same sign as my moon. One more thing, I also had, I was going through a progressed new moon and like progressed balsamic moon into my progressed new moon. So basically, my old life got wiped out. Everything obliterated. That was not comfortable. It was, that was really hard. But in time, other things started to replace it. And I mean everything. And I'll go through the actual like obliteration part. It's like, oh my God, I can't live in Brooklyn anymore. I don't want to live in the city. I don't want to be practicing my body work in this way anymore. Um, I had three major, like 20 to 25-year relationships undergo this test of if something doesn't change, these these relationships are toast. And two of them died, and another one went through a radical transformation, but is now thriving. Um, that's when I restarted studying astrology. Um, yeah, my whole work life changed, my whole social life changed, my whole romantic life changed. Um, and I was, yeah, bought a new house. Like it was like major. But the end result is after a few years of like just navigating that, my life feels much more I feel like this is where I'm supposed to be now. And I'm doing the work and like it's the sun. So it's my idea of who I am, it's my aspirations, it's what I'm even conscious of. Like it was pretty dramatic. And I always say this with Uranus, the intent is to liberate, even though it does so in a very rude way and in a very sometimes sudden, dramatic, drastic way. The intention is to cut the ties and to blast the old, which, puts you in the situation where you have to go towards the new. But then when you do, I'm so much, the result is, yeah, like I have all this new stuff, but the major result is I'm so much more free. And if we're talking about what I was talking about earlier, like what is true comfort? It's not just clinging to the things that make you feel good. True comfort is knowing that no matter what happens, you feel like you're going to be okay. And you don't have to be in this state of trying to make sure that you hold on to things. It's that trust that if something goes, I'm still me. That's specific to to Uranus and your sun. Like I still, the sun represents the spirit. Like the spirit, the spirit, depending on what you subscribe to, spirit can move through any body. Spirit can move through anything. And in some spiritual schools, the spirit evolves and, keeps like evolving through time. Like that spirit can't be changed. All this material stuff, yeah, it changes and it's supposed to change. But spirit is pretty constant. So when Uranus comes around and touches the sun, it shows you that these material things and these ideas you have about who you are aren't who you are. So that's the short answer. Like we'll have everything change, and it was dark.
Sure.
It was dark, but also specific to astrology, and I've heard this from a lot of astrologers. That's when they started their professional practice, and for me, it was literally, and Joe, who was on the show last week, actually pointed this out to me at the time. It was like the week that Uranus finally moved off of my sun. That's when I had my first professional client.
Wow.
And so there's a Uranus astrology thing if you're a person who is doing that. So yeah, long. I think we can have one more quick one if there's another one.
Yeah, I've got a couple more here. I'm gonna go with not a simple answered question, but we'll do our best. Why do you feel astrology makes others so uncomfortable? And is it just one thing in particular? Is it a collective thing? What's going on there with it?
Well, actually, that falls so neatly into everything we've been talking about. I think astrology makes people uncomfortable because you can't point to it and say, look, it's proven. This is why this works. Like, no one really knows why it works. And so people feel uncomfortable about that. And the whole relationship thing, if they don't want to have this idea that they're dependent on nature or planets, or and not that we are, again, astrology doesn't cause things, but you are in you're in relationship with everything that goes on around you, and what goes on in the sky is something that's going on around you. And so people don't want to admit that. Again, they want to be like, no, I am this self-contained thing that has control over their lives all by myself. And I just think that's a little sad. I think you're going to miss out on a lot of magic.
Absolutely.
But thank you, Mandee. That takes us all the way
We
to
did
the
it.
end. And you're going to be with me next week, right, for Eclipse Talk?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, I hope so.
Yeah, I was looking at my calendar. Yeah, I think is that next week already? Yes, I'll be there.
Lunar eclipse. Well, thanks everyone for listening. We're signing off and we'll be back next week, same place, same time. Until then, take it easy and take care.